Imagine two men living just 60 miles apart in Germany, both obsessed with the same radical dream, both risking their reputations and their families' futures on a machine everyone else thought was a joke. They breathed the same smoggy industrial air, they shared the same cultural heritage, and they were racing toward the same finish line, to replace the horse with the explosion. Karl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler were the two titans who birthed the modern world. Yet in one of history's most baffling coincidences, they never once sat in the same room. They never shook hands. They never shared a beer. They were the greatest rivals who never met. Separately, they invented the automobile as we know it, and only after they were both in their graves did their companies finally collide to create the three-point star that defines luxury and engineering excellence today, Mercedes-Benz. Today, we are peeling back the hood on the Benz and Daimler dynasty. We'll explore the gritty reality of the 1880s, where horseless carriages were seen as terrifying, noisy toys for the rich that would surely never last. We'll see how Karl Benz's wife, Bertha, became the world's first true gearhead by stealing her husband's invention for a daring 60-mile road trip to prove it actually worked. We'll dive into Gottlieb Daimler's obsession with the grandfather clock engine and how his partner Wilhelm Maybach, the greatest designer you've never heard of, helped him conquer land, sea, and air. This isn't just a story about gears and pistons. It's a saga of persistence, hidden genius, and a brand that survived 2 world wars to become a symbol of status across the globe. To understand the birth of the car, you have to understand the sheer weight of skepticism in the late 19th century. For thousands of years, humans had relied on muscle, either their own or a horse's. Steam engines existed, but they were massive, coal-belching monsters suited for trains and ships, not for personal travel. Into this world stepped Karl Benz. Born in 1844, Benz was a quiet, meticulous engineer who saw the internal combustion engine not as an add-on for a carriage, but as a completely new species of machine. While others were trying to shove engines into existing horse wagons, Benz was building the motorwagen from the ground up as a 3-wheeled integrated unit. He wasn't just building a car, he was building a system. But being a genius doesn't mean you're a salesman. Benz was a perfectionist and a bit of a pessimist. He spent years tinkering in his Mannheim workshop, terrified of public failure. By 1886, he had officially patented his 3-wheeler, but the public reaction was lukewarm at best. People saw it as a noisy, fragile nuisance. It stalled, it ran out of fuel, and it couldn't handle steep hills. Benz was ready to give up, convinced that the world just wasn't ready for his vision. He needed a spark, and that spark came from the person who knew him best, his wife, Bertha. One morning in 1888, without telling Karl, Bertha took her 2 teenage sons and borrowed the motorwagen for a trip to see her mother. This wasn't just a family visit, it was the world's first long-distance drive. She acted as her own mechanic, using a hatpin to clear a blocked fuel line and her garter to insulate a wire. When she arrived 60 miles away, the news spread like wildfire. The car wasn't just a toy, it was a tool. While Benz was perfecting the 3-wheeler in Mannheim, Gottlieb Daimler was working in a garden shed in Cannstatt, just a short train ride away. Daimler was the opposite of Benz, aggressive, visionary, and relentlessly focused on the engine itself rather than the vehicle. His motto was Das Beste oder Nichts, the best or nothing. Alongside his brilliant protégé, Wilhelm Maybach, Daimler was obsessed with creating a high-speed, lightweight internal combustion engine. They worked in such secrecy that their neighbors actually called the police, suspecting they were running a counterfeit money operation in the shed. What they were actually building was the grandfather clock, the world's first high-speed engine that could be mounted on anything. Daimler and Maybach weren't just thinking about cars. They put their engine on a bicycle, creating the first motorcycle. They put it on a boat, creating the first motorboat. They even put it on a tram. Daimler saw a world where the internal combustion engine powered everything on land, sea, and air, a vision that would eventually become the 3 points of the Mercedes star. While Benz was the father of the automobile as a concept, Daimler was the father of the modern engine. The two men were essentially building 2 halves of a future giant, unaware that their names would one day be joined by a hyphen and recognized in every corner of the earth. The rivalry between the 2 firms, Benz and Saga and Daimler Motorengesellschaft, DMG, was fierce but distant. They competed for patents, for speed records, and for the attention of Europe's burgeoning billionaire class. But as the 19th century closed, both men faced personal tragedies and corporate upheavals. Daimler's health was failing, and he was being pushed out of his own company by financiers who didn't share his passion for innovation. Benz, meanwhile, was struggling with the transition from a workshop to a mass production factory. Neither man lived to see the day their companies would merge. Daimler passed away in 1900, just as the first modern car, the Mercedes, was being designed by Maybach. Benz lived longer, surviving until 1929, but he spent his final years as a revered figurehead, watching as a new generation took the wheel of the industry he had started in a quiet Mannheim shed. The first part of their story ends not with a merger, but with a transformation. In 1901, DMG released a car that looked nothing like a carriage. It was low to the ground, had a front-mounted engine with a honeycomb radiator, and was incredibly fast. It was named Mercedes after the daughter of DMG's biggest distributor, Emil Jelinek. This car made everything Benz had built look old-fashioned. The horse age was officially dead. But as we move into the next part of the saga, we'll see how a devastating world war and a collapsing German economy would eventually force these two bitter rivals to do the one thing their founders never did: join forces to survive. The three-point star was about to be born, but it would be forged in the fires of the 20th century's greatest catastrophes. By the turn of the century, the automobile was no longer a curious horseless miracle. It was becoming a weapon of social and economic disruption. However, the internal combustion engine wasn't just competing with the horse, it was competing with itself. The two companies, Benz and DMG, were locked in a technological arms race that would push engineering to its absolute breaking point. While Karl Benz's firm focused on reliability and catering to the upper middle class, Daimler's company, now increasingly driven by the brilliance of Wilhelm Maybach, went for pure, unadulterated speed. This was the era of the monster races, cars with massive engines that shook the ground and terrified spectators. It was during this period that the brand Mercedes truly conquered the world. Emil Jelinek, a wealthy diplomat and racing enthusiast, didn't just want a car. He wanted a machine that would dominate the nice race week. He famously told DMG, "I don't want a car for today or tomorrow. I want the car of the day after tomorrow." Maybach delivered the Mercedes 35 horsepower in 1901. It was revolutionary because it was the first car that didn't look like a carriage with an engine hidden underneath. It had a long wheelbase, a low center of gravity, and a honeycomb radiator that became the face of the brand. It was so successful that the French Automobile Club famously remarked, "We have entered the era of Mercedes." While the world was falling in love with this new, sleek machine, Karl Benz was struggling. He was a traditionalist at heart, and he viewed these high-speed racing machines as dangerous and unnecessary. His refusal to pivot quickly almost bankrupted his company, leading to a bitter internal power struggle. Eventually, Benz resigned from the active management of his own firm in 1903, though he remained on the board, watching from the sidelines as the industry he birthed moved at a pace he could no longer reconcile with his own cautious nature. But the real challenge wasn't competition, it was survival. The 1910s brought the First World War, and both Benz and Daimler were forced to pivot their massive factories toward the war effort. Instead of luxury tourers for socialites, they were building truck engines, aircraft engines, and armored vehicles. This period transformed the companies into industrial giants, but it also sowed the seeds of their future merger. During the war, they weren't rivals, they were cogs in the same national machine. When the war ended in 1918, Germany was a broken nation. Hyperinflation was so severe that a loaf of bread cost billions of marks, and the luxury car market essentially evaporated overnight. The wealthy elite who once bought Benzes and Mercedes were either dead, broke, or stripped of their titles. In this landscape of economic ruin, the rivalry that had defined the first 30 years of the automobile became a luxury neither company could afford. The German government and banks began to pressure the two firms to cooperate. They started with a community of interest in 1924, sharing designs, purchasing power, and sales networks while remaining separate entities. It was a slow-motion marriage of necessity. The engineers from Mannheim and the designers from Stuttgart, who had spent decades trying to put each other out of business, were now forced to sit at the same tables. It was a clash of cultures, the pragmatic, sturdy Benz philosophy versus the high-performance, glamorous Daimler spirit. The formal merger finally happened in 1926, creating Daimler-Benz AG. It was at this moment that the three-point star of Daimler was merged with the laurel wreath of Benz. They needed a name that reflected both legacies, leading to the birth of Mercedes-Benz. Sadly, Gottlieb Daimler had been dead for 26 years. Karl Benz, however, was still alive at 81. He saw his name joined with his greatest rivals, creating a monopoly on German luxury that would soon face its darkest chapter. As the 1920s gave way to the 1930s, the newly merged company found itself caught in the rising tide of the Third Reich. The story of the dynasty was about to shift from a tale of two inventors to a saga of industrial power utilized by one of history's most monstrous regimes, a period that would test the brand's soul and redefine its legacy forever. The 1930s and 40s represent the most controversial and harrowing era of the Mercedes-Benz story. Under the Nazi regime, the company became the primary supplier of staff cars for high-ranking officials and developed the heavy-duty engines for the Luftwaffe and the Wehrmacht. The image of Adolf Hitler standing in a black Mercedes-Benz 770 Grosser became an indelible, chilling symbol of the era. But the darkness went deeper than just providing transportation. Like many German industrial giants of the time, Daimler-Benz relied heavily on forced labor and prisoners from concentration camps to keep their factories running as the male workforce was sent to the front lines. It is a period the company has had to reckon with deeply in the decades since, acknowledging that their survival during the war came at a staggering human cost. When the Allied bombs stopped falling in 1945, the Mercedes-Benz factories were little more than smoking craters. The company was essentially dead. The Soviets dismantled what was left of the eastern factories, and the Western Allies debated whether to allow German heavy industry to ever return. But the Benz and Daimler DNA, that relentless obsession with the best or nothing, refused to stay buried. In the ruins of post-war Germany, workers began to scavenge for parts, literally rebuilding the factories brick by brick. By 1946, they were producing basic delivery vans and ambulances. But the world didn't want Mercedes-Benz to build vans. They wanted the glamour and engineering prowess that had defined the pre-war years. The comeback was spearheaded by the 300 SL Gullwing in 1954. With its doors that opened toward the sky and a fuel-injected engine that was decades ahead of its time, the Gullwing was a declaration to the world. Mercedes-Benz was back, and they were still the masters of the machine. This car transitioned the brand from a relic of the old European aristocracy into a symbol of the new global jet set. It was the car of Hollywood stars, racing legends, and captains of industry. The merger that was forced by economic collapse in 1926 had finally paid off, blending Benz's engineering integrity with Daimler's flair for the dramatic. Today, when you see that three-point star, you aren't just looking at a logo. You're looking at the resolution of a 140-year-old paradox. You are looking at the combined spirits of two men who lived as neighbors but worked as strangers. Karl Benz, the man who gave the world the car, and Gottlieb Daimler, the man who gave the world the engine. Their companies have survived 2 world wars, several economic collapses, and the total transformation of human society. They invented the way we move, and in doing so, they invented the modern world. The dynasty they left behind is no longer about a family name. It's about a standard of excellence that suggests, even after a century and a half, the grandfather clock engine is still ticking, driving us toward a future they could only have dreamed of in their quiet garden sheds. As the 20th century progressed, the Mercedes-Benz name became synonymous with the economic miracle of West Germany. But the dynasty's true strength lay in its ability to lead through engineering rather than just following trends. While other manufacturers were focused on planned obsolescence and flashy tail fins, the engineers in Stuttgart were obsessing over things the driver couldn't even see. In the 1950s, an engineer named Béla Barényi, a man who held more patents than Thomas Edison, revolutionized automotive safety. He realized that the rigid, tank-like construction of early cars was actually killing people. In a crash, the car stayed solid while the passengers absorbed the impact. Barényi invented the crumple zone, designing a chassis that would sacrifice itself to protect the humans inside. This wasn't just a new feature. It was a fundamental shift in the philosophy of the car, moving from a machine of speed to a vessel of sanctuary. This period also saw the brand perfect the Executive Express. The Mercedes-Benz 600, launched in 1963, became the gold standard for heads of state, celebrities, and even the Pope. It was a massive, hydraulic-powered masterpiece that could whisper along at high speeds with the grace of a private jet. It reaffirmed the Daimler side of the lineage, the pursuit of the absolute best, while the legendary reliability of the diesel models, like the W123, honored the Benz side of the lineage, the creation of a machine that could run for 500,000 miles without breaking a sweat. The two men who never met had finally seen their values perfectly balanced in a single, silver-painted icon. However, the final chapter of this dynasty is perhaps the most challenging. As we entered the 21st century, the world that Benz and Daimler created, a world of gears, pistons, and fossil fuels, began to collide with the reality of a changing climate. The grandfather clock engine, the very thing that started this whole saga in a garden shed, is now being phased out in favor of silent electric motors and digital brains. The company faces a radical transformation, pivoting toward the EQ era, where software is as important as steel. It's a moment of historical irony. The automobile is becoming a completely new species once again, much like it was when Karl Benz first pushed his three-wheeler out into the streets of Mannheim. Looking back, the Benz and Daimler story is a testament to the power of the individual vision. It tells us that history isn't always made by committees or massive corporations. It's made by lonely men in workshops who refuse to listen to the word impossible. It's a story of two parallel lives that shape the way every human on this planet experiences distance and time. Even though Karl and Gottlieb never shared a conversation, their hyphenated legacy speaks for them every day on every highway in the world. They proved that while an inventor's life is finite, a well-engineered idea can live forever. From the first spark in a garden shed to the silent glide of a modern electric sedan, the Benz and Daimler dynasty remains the undisputed heartbeat of the machine age.